Zelenskyy met with Trump, and now I'll tell you everything that's known about the meeting between the presidents in this episode. Hello everyone, I am Solomia Veditska, and this is a new edition of TSN. We invite you to subscribe to our official YouTube channel right now, watch our live broadcast daily, and please be sure to leave a comment below about which specific stories you found to be the most interesting or impactful today. We value your feedback immensely. Here are just a few of the most important and compelling topics we are covering in today's program. How many frozen strays have already been taken in by the staff of one of the shelters in the Kyiv region? Antarctica in the Kyiv region. Why are hundreds of Ukrainians heading to the frozen sea? At least 7 people injured, including a 14-year-old child. In Dnipro, a drone struck a 16-story building. During the day, the city was under a massive drone attack. The explosion caused apartments on the upper floors to catch fire. Windows were blown out in the surrounding buildings. TSN correspondent Anastasia Neverna is working at the site of the strike, and now she will tell us more.
Around 1 p.m., the air raid siren sounded again in Dnipro, warning of a drone attack. One of these drones crashed directly into a 16-story building in one of Dnipro's residential districts. The moment of impact was caught on video. The impact occurred at the level of the 14th and 15th floors. Several apartments immediately caught fire. The fire was extinguished by evening. Several apartments were completely destroyed and many had their windows blown out. Tatiana was just coming back from work. She was standing nearby at a traffic light when a Russian drone flew into the entrance of her building. Fortunately, no one was home, the woman says. She doesn't know how badly her apartment was damaged.
I was on my way here. I was standing at the traffic light. They wouldn't let me through. The traffic light wasn't working. I saw a flash and realized I was no longer in a hurry to go anywhere. There was no one there. My son is serving. My daughter-in-law left with the child.
Sophia came home after a night shift, had just fallen asleep when she heard an explosion. Wearing whatever she had on, the girl ran out into the street. The main thing she says is that she managed to save the cat because at first, half asleep, she didn't even understand what was happening. What happened?
Then something started falling from above. Even though I don't live there anymore, I could hear it. And then I got scared, grabbed my documents, the cat, and ran out in my slippers. And by then, everyone in the building entrance was terrified. I don't know what to do now. Do you understand? Where am I supposed to live? Now, I'm just having a breakdown already.
I don't know what's happened to the apartment, and Yaroslav, his home is almost at the center of the impact, on the 13th floor. He just found out about the strike.
He quickly rushed over to the scene without any delay. After finishing an exceptionally long and highly productive day at my professional workplace, finally returning home.
Rescuers were helping residents trapped in apartments on the upper floors to get down.
Tents have been set up for heating and for providing immediate first aid. 16 people have been rescued. All relevant services have been mobilized to deal with the aftermath.
At the moment, 7 people are known to be injured. Among them is a 14-year-old girl and 2 other people. A 64-year-old woman and an 88-year-old man are hospitalized. The aftermath of the attack is still being dealt with. Anastasia Neverna, Vladislav Komishin, Dnipro, TSN 1+1.
Kryvyi Rih is also under heavy attack. There, the number of injured has already risen to 12. Among the victims are 4 children. The youngest is 1.5 years old. A 2-year-old boy was also injured, as well as girls aged 8 and 10. The occupiers have been attacking Kryvyi Rih with Shaheds all day and have also struck with ballistic missiles. 8 of the injured are in hospitals. A 2-story apartment building, private homes, administrative buildings, a cultural institution, and infrastructure facilities have been damaged. Thousands of subscribers have been left without electricity. Water utility facilities have switched to generators. And boiler houses are also being restarted. In the afternoon, the high-speed tram stopped due to the power outage. Its operation was restored. Due to the lack of power at the mine, miners have to walk up to the surface. 2 people were killed and 3 injured in the Kharkiv region. The Russians launched a drone hunt for civilian vehicles. At the entrance to Kozacha Lopan, the enemy attacked a volunteer car delivering bread with FPV drones. The car was blown to pieces. The driver and passenger died on the spot. And in Hrushivka, in the Kindrashivska community, Russian terrorists struck a medical vehicle. A man and a woman were injured. Both suffered concussions. The woman also sustained a wound to her lower leg. Another civilian car was hit by an enemy drone in Ruska Lozova. There were 2 people inside, one of them a 70-year-old man. He later sought medical assistance. There is no threat to his life. A Russian strike destroyed an entire street in Zaporizhzhia. The occupiers once again hit the private sector with Shaheds. 1 man was injured. People found fragments of the enemy UAV in their yards. And our correspondent Daria Nazarova will tell you more about the consequences of the Russian terrorist attack.
Not a single roof survived, and the homes are battered. Work is underway here in the morning. Utility workers are hauling away piles of construction debris. Yesterday evening, the Russians attacked Zaporizhzhia once again. A Russian Shahed drone destroyed an entire street. 1 house was completely destroyed. The neighbors are frightened. They say they haven't heard such a powerful explosion in a long time. On this street alone, about a dozen homes were damaged.
Actually, when I was just sitting there quietly, I didn't hear a loud explosion, but rather a very strong and sudden impact. It was so intense that I even jumped up high while I was in my bed. I immediately thought it was somewhere nearby, and now I look, it's just horrifying.
As a result of the attack, a 47-year-old man was injured. He is currently receiving outpatient treatment. The neighbors say it all happened in an instant.
He was watching TV, sitting, reading about cars on the internet. Then it flew in and fell. His wife was taking a bath. The child was on the 2nd floor. Everyone is alive and well, and the rest can be replaced.
From the explosion, Mr. Roman's dog was injured by shrapnel.
The dogs were very frightened. They trembled all night, whined and whimpered. Something must have happened. It's okay. She'll survive. Why did she bark? I'll bandage her up now. You need to apply ointment there and change the dressing gradually. I've already called the vet and told him.
Another Shahed struck in a different part of the city. A drone struck the epicenter building. The premises and goods there were damaged. Daria Nazarova, Andriy Kupovka, Zaporizhzhia, TSN 1+1.
The defense forces of Ukraine have cleared and liberated it from Russian invaders, the village of Sukhetske in Donetsk region. This was reported by the Deep State Monitoring Project. However, the occupiers managed to advance near Myrnohrad and Zaporizhzhia. In Zaporizhzhia region, analysts report the defense forces have stabilized the situation on the outskirts of Pokrovsk. The Russians currently do not have the strength to break through to the north of the city, but they are trying to infiltrate in small groups. However, Ukrainian fighters are destroying them. Sometimes enemy assault troops surrender without resistance. The enemy is trying to bypass and encircle Kostiantynivka from the flanks, the tactic of infantry infiltrations through the lines of defense. The defense has not changed for several months in a row. In total, 154 combat engagements were recorded over the past day. He criticized Europe and announced a meeting between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations. The president of Ukraine spoke at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He reproached the Europeans for sending a meager number of troops to Greenland. Against the backdrop of Trump's claims, Zelensky noted that Ukraine has experience, expertise, and weapons to counter the Russian fleet and could use it in the event of a threat to the island from Russian ships if it were a member of NATO. The president also said that tomorrow, 2-day negotiations between Ukraine, the US, and Russia will begin in the United Arab Emirates. Zelensky's speech took place almost immediately after his meeting with US President Donald Trump. Before that, the Ukrainian negotiating team met with the American team, and then the American delegation will have contacts in Moscow. In his speech, Zelensky reminded that Russia continues to terrorize Ukraine with cold, and this would not have happened if the aggressor country did not have the ability to produce missiles.
The Russian Federation receives components from companies in the European Union and the United States and Taiwan. Europe remains almost silent. The United States says nothing, and Vladimir Putin continues to manufacture missiles. And I thank every country, of course, and every company that helps Ukraine repair its energy system. This is crucial. Thank you to everyone who supports the Pearl program, who helps us with Patriot missiles. But wouldn't it be cheaper and easier to simply cut Russia off from the components it needs to produce missiles? Or even destroy the factories that manufacture them?
The EU needs to raise hundreds of billions of euros for its own defense. This was stated by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz at the World Economic Forum in Davos. According to him, Europe has already increased its defense investments, but this funding needs to be scaled up. He also emphasized that the Allies will protect Greenland, Denmark, and the northern part of the continent from the threat posed by Russia. At the same time, Friedrich Merz welcomed the US president's abandonment of previous rhetoric and threats to seize Greenland from allied Denmark by force. Germany, according to wing advocates for the continuation of negotiations.
We support negotiations between Denmark, Greenland, and the United States based on these principles. I have discussed this with President Trump, Prime Minister Frederiksen, Secretary General Mark Rutte, and others in recent days. The goal of these negotiations is to reach an agreement on closer cooperation among allies in the north and beyond. This is good news that we are taking steps in the right direction. I welcome President Trump's statements yesterday.
Russia will likely continue its subversive activities in the Baltic Sea. At least that's the assessment provided by Finnish military intelligence. This is reported by the Finnish broadcaster Yle. In particular, this concerns attempts to damage underwater infrastructure in the area. Russia uses ships for sabotage and remains widely present in the Baltic Sea. Incidents involving the damage of underwater cables by vessels, including those linked to Russia's so-called shadow fleet. Over the past year, such cases have not been uncommon. In particular, 2 weeks ago, another incident of damage to a fiber optic underwater cable was recorded. At the same time, military intelligence dismisses the possibility of a direct Russian threat to Finland, since the aggressor country is focusing all its efforts on the war against Ukraine. Will Europeans draw any conclusions? And how should they respond to Russia's provocations to prevent them from happening again? Be sure to share your opinion with us in the comments under this broadcast on YouTube. Like this video and subscribe to the channel, and in the meantime, I'll continue with the TSN broadcast. They covered up cigarette smuggling worth hundreds of thousands of euros. NABU and SAPI have exposed a former head of the State Border Guard Service, a general, the head of a department at one of the border checkpoints, as well as another former official. All three have been notified of suspicion. And according to investigators, in 2023, the criminal group organized the illegal transfer of cigarettes to the EU. They used vans with license plates resembling diplomatic ones for this purpose. And the schemes were covered up by top officials of the State Border Guard Service. For this, they regularly received bribes of 3,000 euros per vehicle. From July to November 2023 alone, border guards received at least 204,000 euros in illicit gains. And during this time, 68 vehicles carrying contraband illegally crossed the border. To avoid inspections at the border, they used vehicles registered in the Czech Republic and Austria, onto which they attached special license plates resembling diplomatic ones. Additionally, they placed passengers with diplomatic passports in the cars, family members of Ukrainian diplomats in Europe. Such documents granted immunity, which meant a guarantee of unhindered passage. Almost 1,700,000 hryvnias in kickbacks on medical procurements. A large-scale corruption scheme was uncovered in Lviv. According to the investigation, it was organized by the head nurse of a medical diagnostic center. She involved 2 hospital employees, 3 directors of supplier companies, and their joint representative in the scheme. They submitted bids to the Prozoro system. They submitted lists of drugs at inflated prices and won every time, even if competitors offered lower prices. They did not deliver all the goods, but the head nurse, they approved fake documents. After receiving the money, the directors of the supplier companies distributed it among all participants in the scheme. There was a 10% kickback from the amount of each delivery. All participants in the scheme face up to 6 years in prison. He embezzled over 2.5 million hryvnias of teachers' salaries and tried to hide abroad. In Prikarpatia, a 35-year-old village council deputy was on the international wanted list for almost a year. The investigation established that for several years he worked part-time as an accountant at 3 educational institutions at once and gained full access to the remote banking service system. He would pay himself salaries, greatly inflating the amounts, as well as to relatives he had arranged to be hired at the Lyceum, even though they did not actually work there. This went on for 2 years until one of the school principals began to suspect that something was wrong. Investigators say the perpetrator managed to flee abroad, but he was detained in the Czech Republic and has already been extradited to Ukraine. For large-scale fraud, the man faces up to 12 years in prison. The school principals also paid the price for official negligence.
The situation itself worked in his favor because it was the beginning of 2021. The restructuring of local government bodies had just been completed. All the educational institutions where he worked, officially and unofficially, were independent legal entities. And accordingly, there arose a need for an accountant. Previously, this position did not exist in educational institutions. And so, well, who wouldn't trust a member of the village council? A young, ambitious, knowledgeable person. He crossed the border unofficially.
In the coming days, Kyiv will switch to strict but still predictable blackout schedules. This was announced by Minister of Energy Denis Shmyhal, who heads the task force for eliminating the consequences of the emergency in the capital and the region. They plan to switch to schedules despite the fact that the situation remains extremely difficult, and since January 9th, Kyiv has been living under emergency power outages. DTEK reported that as of Wednesday evening, all critical infrastructure facilities in the capital had been supplied with power. However, they still believe that the situation does not yet allow them to exit the emergency mode and switch to scheduled outages. Last night, as Shmyhal reported, it was possible to partially stabilize the operation of heat generation in the capital. And as of today, 2,600 buildings in Kyiv are still without heating. This was reported by Vitaly Klitschko. According to him, since last night, utility workers have managed to restore heating to almost 600 apartment buildings. Stock up on necessary medicines, water and food for 3 to 5 days and prepare an emergency essentials bag. So you should have enough at home. Stock up on drinking and technical water, get long-lasting food supplies and update your first aid kit with the medications you use. Your emergency bag should contain your documents, warm clothes, medicines, heating devices, personal hygiene items and a supply of cash. In addition, the Ministry of Internal Affairs recommends checking the charge level of backup power sources, the technical condition of your vehicle, and making sure you have sleeping gear. Those who have pets should also make sure to stock up on pet food. If there is no heating, do not try to heat the entire apartment. Stay in the smallest room, dress in several layers, use hot water bottles, and keep up light physical activity. Physical activity. A unique underwater special operation in freezing conditions up to minus 15 degrees was carried out by the State Emergency Service divers. As a result of a Russian shelling, one of the historic thermal power plants was flooded due to a damaged pipe. This significantly complicated the repair of equipment on which the heating and electricity supply to thousands of homes depended. In icy water and extreme conditions, the rescue divers began work to eliminate the damage. The special operation lasted for 6 days. The water leak was stopped, which allowed the energy workers to continue restoration efforts. The rescuers were awarded state honors, Orders for Courage of the Third Degree, the Order of Danilo Halitsky, and the Defender of the Homeland Medal. Severe and prolonged frosts become a deadly trap for thousands of homeless animals. That's why all across Ukraine, caring people are feeding and repairing temporary shelters, so-called points of invincibility for the furry ones. So why is it so important to help homeless animals during severe frosts? And why have animal rights activists decided to change the legislation for this cause? But how many frozen strays have already been taken in by the staff of one of the shelters in the Kyiv region? Strays already taken in by the staff of one of the shelters in the Kyiv region. TSN correspondent Alina Lisova will tell you all the details.
This is Azazello. He's from Kyiv.
He was completely frozen and exhausted. The Zoo Patrol team found this dog when he was already barely moving.
He was already frozen. Now we'll try pouring some Malay on him.
First, they warmed the animal up, fed him, and later took him to the shelter, where Azazello now lives in a comfortable enclosure, together with his friends.
This is a dog from Irpin,
with frostbitten paws and a tumor on his belly. Irena shows the home of another dog that was recently taken off the street.
We're going to treat him right now. He's warming up here so much that he doesn't even want to come out to us.
In total, more than 150 stray animals have been rescued since the onset of severe frosts, just in this shelter alone. Thank you. Requests for warm rescues of homeless animals in the capital or the region. All concerned citizens submit them to the Zoo Patrol, after which volunteers immediately head to the location.
Previous winters were not this cold. Every day we receive a large number of requests. This time we are focusing specifically on the most severe cases. Animals suffering from critical hypothermia, those with severe frostbite, and injured animals left out on the streets.
Winter frosts are not just a challenge for people, but a real threat to four-legged animals, volunteers say. Because of the war, many animals have ended up on the streets, especially after their owners were evacuated or their homes were destroyed. And when the temperature drops below -10, it's not just a risk of hypothermia or hunger for them, but often even death.
Animals instinctively start looking for shelter from the cold, try to get into stores, warm themselves under car hoods, and so on. That's why we would like people who see such animals not to remain indifferent, on the sidelines.
In particular, the Animal Protection Organization has called on the authorities to officially allow businesses to let animals into their establishments. Some businesses have already supported this initiative. However, there were also those who faced a wave of online hate because they refused to do so. Although they officially explained that it was all because of the law.
In Ukraine, there are currently regulations in effect in 15 cities. These regulations really do prohibit being with animals in retail spaces. There is also an outdated order that sets out sanitary standards, and we decided to work on this through advocacy and to initiate the appropriate changes to the legislation. These changes are to be introduced by the Ministry of Economy in a specific order regarding zoning.
However, while the initiative is still in the process of being approved, the trend toward humanity has spread widely. The internet and social media were flooded with photos and videos showing how, all across Ukraine, more and more invincibility points for furry friends were being set up from improvised materials.
It doesn't take much time, literally just 2 to 3 hours of free time. We made the first shelter out of a nightstand we found near the entrance to our building. Someone had thrown it out, we picked it up, and I left a note there.
People are also preparing hot food. These kind people carefully lay out soft, cozy beds, or even go so far as to open the wide doors of buses, just to keep our vulnerable little furry friends warm and safe during these incredibly bitter and freezing winter frosts.
We love them very much and they feel our love. And it's as if they're thanking us for all of this. Well, of course, we couldn't do otherwise.
Is it possible for us to proceed?
A large Ukrainian flag was unfurled in Odessa. On Unity Day, about 30 people gathered in the park near the Taras Shevchenko monument. Despite the threat of shelling and blackouts, Odessa residents still decided to hold a peaceful march and support the soldiers currently on the front lines in this way. The location for the event was chosen symbolically. Here stands a monument to one of the pillars of the Ukrainian nation, the Great Kobzar, and nearby is the Alley of Fallen Heroes, Odessa residents who gave their lives so that Ukraine could be united and whole. To form a human chain. The weather prevented the participants from doing so. But the giant Ukrainian flag, nearly 100 square meters in size, was still unfurled to the sound of an air raid siren.
Unity, especially in these difficult and dark times for Ukraine, is particularly important for every Ukrainian today. There is no electricity in our homes. We must remember that this light still shines in our hearts. It exists only when we are united by a common goal.
Every year we must remember this important date, and during the full-scale invasion, it is especially crucial for all people to unite, for all of Ukraine to come together. Children, adults, soldiers, civilians, and medical workers. Anyone who, at this time, in these difficult times, lives on the territory of our country and does everything for our common victory.
In Ivano-Frankivsk, Unity Day was marked with a joint prayer. In honor of the 107th anniversary of the proclamation of the unification of the Ukrainian and West Ukrainian People's Republics, several hundred people gathered at Vychevy Square. Not even the frost could stop them. They say the significance of this day cannot be overestimated for the history of Ukraine. With a moment of silence and a shared prayer, the townspeople honored not only the heroes of the past, but above all those who are now fighting for the sovereignty of a united Ukraine. Today,
unity means that our Ukrainian state stretches all the way to the Caucasus, as it is sung in the anthem. Today, more than ever, we feel that many people have come to us. We have many sister cities, including Huliaipol and Pokrovske and Kupiansk, because it is very important now to maintain unity in order to withstand this Moscow-Ukrainian war.
In 1990, my life turned out in such a way that I took part in the human chain of unity from Luka, from the western Ukrainian lands to central Ukraine and the east. And for me, these are memories that are very positive, because everyone was in a very uplifted mood. For the first time, we were marching very actively with yellow and blue flags. It was such an incredible feeling of freedom and the realization that Ukraine was beginning to become free, something that's still hard to describe to this day.